And thank you to all of you. Thank you to Steffi and Marcel, who were here, and they just disappeared. There's Marcel. Where are they? You're right here. Thank you so much for inventing this creative gathering. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you to Herbert for everything you do to make DLD what it is. To Maria for a super warm welcome today. I'm going to just try to move these, I think. So I don't trip. Yeah, that's great. And where's Yossi? He's gone. So I was going to say that Yossi's the second most charming man here because my husband's still here. But Yossi has been harassing me mercilessly for years to get me to this conference. So I'm really glad to be here. And he always does it in the most charming way. So I've never been here before, but DLD has been super important to Facebook. Dan Rose, who's here with me somewhere, spoke here last year. He runs the Facebook partnerships and platforms teams globally. And Mark Zuckerberg, Mike Schroepfer, our head of engineering, all have spoken before. So it is great, oh, thank you, great for me to have a chance to be here too. It's also a little daunting to be the last speaker when things are running slightly late on the last day. So I'm going to take the good advice I've been given and keep it short. So at the beginning of last year, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's founder, was named the Time Man of the Year, which is obviously a great honor. But none of us have ever had that experience. People also say when that happens that things are over. That's the pinnacle of influence. You'll never, go up again. You only go down from there. And there were a lot of predictions that social media would start to decline because it's all kind of trivial and silly, right? I mean, people send pictures, they post things, but it's all this small little stuff that can't make a really big difference. So we think the year since then has proved that those predictions were wrong, that basically social media is not just part of our daily lives, but increasingly part of what happens within the world. And people ask why. And I think the reason social media has become so ubiquitous and such a part of our daily life is because of three trends. The first is the trend from anonymity to authentic identity. So in, I think, 1994, 1995, there was a famous cartoon in The New Yorker, if people remember it, with a dog in front of a terminal. And the caption read, "On the internet, no one knows you're a dog." Does anyone see this and remember it? Thank you for nodding, because when I reference things that are more than 5 years ago, no one ever nods at Facebook, and it makes me feel old, so I'm super grateful that anyone will acknowledge they remember something from 1994. But the idea was that on the internet, no one knows you're a dog because we're all anonymous on the internet. And that has fundamentally changed because of social media and Facebook and others. And basically now, what we do online and on our mobile devices is increasingly about who we are, about real identity. I am myself, Ariana is Ariana, Steffi is Steffi, Herbert is Herbert. We are our real identities online. The second trend is a shift from the wisdom of crowds to the wisdom of friends. The internet promised to change everything, and once again, for those of us who are old enough to be around before the internet, a couple nods. See, I need friends. When I say that at work, people say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, what do you mean, what do I mean? They say, well, what do you mean before the internet? And then sometimes they say, what was it like in that tone of voice? So I need nods. But the internet promised to change absolutely everything. And it did. It changed a lot. But the main thing the internet provided was really information. It was information that you got in an anonymous way, and it was information that was not personalized for you. The same information for everyone. Now, the information web is not going away. It still serves a really useful function. But we think that the social web has increasing importance because the answer to a lot of questions is a better one coming from the wisdom of friends than the wisdom of crowds. So we're all in Munich. Not all of us live here. Would I rather know what the thousands of people in the world think is the best restaurant in Munich? Or would I rather ask my hosts who come here every year? I probably would take Steffi's recommendation over the recommendation of the anonymous masses. If I have, thank you, and I know it would be excellent. If I have, 10 minutes to catch the news of the day, do I want to just look at the headlines? Sometimes. But sometimes I want to look in my newsfeed and read what my friends are reading, because they've already done the sorting for me. This is the shift to what we think of as the wisdom of friends. The third trend, which I think is by far the most important, is the transition of all of us from being receivers of information to being broadcasters of information. And I think this has huge historical significance. If you think over the history of the world, in order to actually broadcast information, in order to have a voice, you had to be rich or famous or powerful or own a TV station or get lucky and have your 15 minutes of fame. But the people in this room, usually, if they want to say something to the world, can. But if you think about everyone else, the power of being a broadcaster has now been given to them as well. And that is a really big deal, because everyone now has the power of voice. I think what we're seeing in the world is the balance of power shifting. Because we have real identity, the web powering us as individuals, connected to who we know, what you see is this shift in power from institutions to individuals. A shift from the historically powerful to the historically powerless. The old rules just don't always apply anymore, and a lot of the new rules are being written by people who don't even know they're writing them. Last May, there's a woman named Deb Kogan I had never heard of before, but in great Facebook fashion, she is a friend of my friend Betsy. She's a 4-year-old, she lives in New York. Her son had a rash. So she called the doctor and they said, oh, don't worry about it. But then she felt weird about it, so she took a picture of her son and she posted it to her Facebook friends. That picture went around, and about 30 minutes later, another woman who was a friend of a friend called her and said, get your son to the hospital. That looks exactly like what happened to my child a year before. Her son had this rare illness, Kawasaki disease, that if you don't treat it right away, can be fatal. Posting that picture almost certainly saved her son's life. She rewrote the rules of how to diagnose a child's illness that day, not by trying to rewrite the rules, by just using the power of her voice to figure out what she needed. We think this has a profound impact, that this is a revolution that touches every aspect of our lives. It reshapes our lives as individuals. And there's a real worry about this, and it's a worry that I want to say is actually legitimate. People worry, are we ever going to speak to each other again? Will my teenagers sit in the back of the car and text each other? Will people only hear information from their own social circles so that we become increasingly insular? These things are legitimate concerns, and they're concerns that are being explored by academics and by people out there. But our view is that not perfectly, not in every situation, certainly there are people who disagree, and there are times this isn't true. But over the most part, this technology brings us much closer together. I have a group of friends from high school, so that's before university in the United States, and there were 7 of us, 6 of them and me. And once again, we're old, so when we went to college, there was no internet. And we used to keep in touch with each other by writing letters. Once a month, everyone would write a letter, photocopy it, and put it in the mail to the other 6. Then email happened, and we started writing these monthly summaries. So I would get a monthly summary of my life from them, and they would get one from me. And then Facebook launched groups, and we put up a Facebook group. And now, no one writes long summaries anymore, but I get these little posts. You know, my friend Beth will say, my daughter's sick, having a rough day. My friend Jamie will say, had a big meeting at work. And what I find is that by hearing from them in the daily activities of their lives, in the small stuff, in the stuff that doesn't seem like it would matter, I actually get a much fuller picture of their lives, because it's in that real-time sharing that the fullness of their experience comes out. That doesn't mean the technology will always do good. No technology ever will. That doesn't mean that this will always be good for every individual. It won't. But I think over the course of what social media is doing, what technology is doing, this is changing our ability to interact with each other and reshaping the way we can live our lives as part of a social network. It's also reshaping our relationship with institutions and governments. Iceland is redrafting its constitution online, crowdsourcing its constitution in the middle of the process, something that would have been inconceivable when you think about the long history of governments. After the Christchurch earthquake in New Zealand, people used Facebook to set up a page, and the city council published where do you get water, which hospitals are open, which roads are open, all to this Facebook page, and people used it to help each other. Spain, the movement that we're seeing all over, this was one of the first, called 15 Millones, people rising up and saying, we want more accountability, we want more transparency, we want to understand more about what our government is doing, and individuals making demands that their government has had to listen to. It's also reshaping consumption of media. We just heard from Arianna Huffington, and we already heard this, but what they've done is actually been so successful that even though the HuffPost is relatively new, very new in the history of media, they've overtaken many of the larger and more established papers. Why? Lots of reasons, but one of them, as Arianna has said, is the very broad and deep use of social media, that they implemented the ability for friends to bring friends along to share what they're reading much more deeply. Facebook's now the #2 driver of traffic around the web, and people who have integrated with Facebook don't only get more traffic from us, but importantly, they often find that the users they get from Facebook are more engaged. And that makes sense. If I pick up something, I'll read it because I'm interested. But if my friend Arianna sends me something or posts something and says, read this, I'm paying more attention and I'll spend more time. This is also reshaping opportunities for economic growth, which is what I want to focus on today. It is such a critical time for the world economies. Every economy is struggling to figure out, particularly in the developed world in many ways, to figure out how do we maintain thriving economies, economies that help everyone succeed. How do we make sure our economies continue to grow? In May of 2011, McKinsey put out a study on the economic impact of the internet. And they said that if the internet were considered a sector, it contributes more to GDP than agriculture or utilities. And it's half the size of either the healthcare industry or the financial services industry. Over 15 years, they looked at 13 countries. The internet was responsible for 7% of the growth. And over the past 5 years, the internet was responsible for 11% of the growth. So that trend is accelerating. That means that the people in this room, all of you, are not just creating great companies and great products, but really importantly, fueling growth, creating jobs, making sure our economies can continue to expand. Social media is a really important part of this growth. And we've been looking at how to measure this. In the United States, University of Maryland did a study. They looked at just jobs that were on the Facebook platform. So these are technical jobs, like some of the companies here that have integrated. And they found that in the last year in the United States, social media and Facebook were responsible for 200,000 jobs. Examples like Zynga, who has been historically our largest gaming developer, they have 2,800 employees, which is basically the same size as Facebook. They're starting to grow all over the world. This technology is increasingly important for small businesses, and small businesses are increasingly important for the economy. Over the last 17 years in the United States and globally, 65% of the jobs that have been created by small business. So the growth and the ability of small businesses to grow is critical to our economy. In the United States, there are about 14 million small businesses. Over 9 million of those use Facebook, and 3.2 million of them have an official Facebook page where they're growing their business. Some 50% of Facebook users have connected to at least one small business. This same transformation is happening in Europe. Businesses are growing, entrepreneurs are being created, like many of you here today, and importantly, we're finding new ways for companies to continue to invent themselves, reinvent themselves, and grow our economy. Today, we're pleased to be releasing a report from Deloitte & Touche. Chris Williams is here somewhere. Chris? There he is. So he and his team led this report, and he's here to release it. And the results are really clear. Just as we saw in the US when we released a report in the spring, The internet, social media, and Facebook are driving economic growth. Their study found that Facebook added $15.3 billion in value to the European economy just in the past year, mostly by driving about $32 billion in revenue, so that 15 was truly incremental. In the same period of time, they found that Facebook created over 230,000 jobs in Europe, and that's just this year alone. It's interesting to look into the report at the differences in the different countries, and the increases are most pronounced in the UK, France, Italy, and here in Germany. The app economy, which is really fueling the developer platform, is strongest here in Germany. Business participation rates, which is things like using the like button in social media, highest in Italy. Behind the numbers are people. Always at Facebook, behind the numbers are people. And these are real people starting real companies. Like European gaze company Wooga. Where's Jens? He's tall, so there he is. You see, I told you he's tall. They launched their first game called Brain Buddies when they only had 5 people. Now they launch games in 7 languages simultaneously. They employ 100, if you include the people that haven't started yet, Jens told me, 140 people. They have over 35 million players per month, going up to 37. And they have become our 5th largest game company globally. So they're not just serving German users from here, but they're serving users all over the world. Spotify, a Swedish-founded, UK-headquartered music streaming service, they launched on our platform in September, and since then they've had 7 million additional users, and they have 2.5 million paying subscribers. In a world where I think people are worried that people don't want to pay for music, Spotify's here to tell you that they do, and they will do it in the millions. They often find that when people are engaged with their service in a social way with their friends, they do more sharing, continually more engagement, and importantly, they're much more willing to pay. Large brands are finding that this is an important driver of their business too. Brands have always been about trying to make a real connection with the consumers that most matter, the people that are going to be the ones who recommend their product to others, you know, a la the tipping point. You get the connectors, you get the recommenders, and then they'll make your product go viral. Well, that's what's happening on Facebook and social media. What we find is that this is the word of mouth at scale. You know, if I have a great experience in a store or buying something online, I might tell my sister, I'll probably tell Ariana. But if I post it to Facebook, I have an average of 130 friends, and they can see it and their friends see it, creating this word of mouth at scale where we have found over time that the distance between one person and 1 million for any large brand on Facebook is 4 steps. It takes just 4 people sharing to hit 1 million users. One great example from Europe is Burberry. Burberry is a 160-year-old retailer that's had a major revival and is now the 4th fastest growing luxury brand in the entire world. They launched their body brand and fragrance online. They launched it on Facebook, and they distributed over 200,000 samples in 2 weeks. But what was important to them is that the people they distributed those samples to wanted them. They weren't in a store handing it to anyone who walked by, but the people had to fan their site, connect to their site, and show real interest. So they felt that those samples were not just distributed more quickly, but went to people that were going to take the time to tell their friends about it. Unlike most other luxury brands, they spend a lot more of their marketing budget online, and they spend the majority of their online budget on Facebook. So for a company that's this traditional with its 160 years, they've been super, super thoughtful about embracing new technology. And they'll say it's one of the reasons they're growing so quickly around the world. Aegis Media, based here in Europe, is now starting a whole new arm of its agency dedicated only to Facebook and social. But even more dramatic than the impact on these big businesses is the impact on small businesses. The McKinsey study from May found that small businesses anywhere in the world that use technology grow twice as quickly, have twice as much revenue, and hire more than 2 times as many people as those same companies when they don't use technology. And the companies I'm talking about here are not Woga and Zynga and tech companies. These are basic, non-technical companies. This is the Sprinkles cupcakes. This is the gardening shop around the corner. This is your local dry cleaner. With those companies using technology and using social media, they grow much more quickly. A few local examples from Europe. France, a company called Company Kid. They sell baby shoes, not a high-tech industry. They put up a Facebook page where they do deals and customer service and give direct feedback. They have 3,700 fans, not a huge amount, but for that business, they're creating 50% of their customers are coming from just that base of fans. Here in Germany, here in Munich, I'm going to mispronounce this, I apologize, but Trachten Ungemeyer, they make traditional Bavarian clothing, and they're a really niche business. So the web has been really important to them because it's their window to the world. Using social media, their sales are up 20% compared to last year, and they've hired 8 more people. And I'm going to have a chance to meet the owners here later today. This is the stuff that will drive our economy. Jobs are going to be added one at a time by small companies and by big, who use the power of social media and other technologies to grow their business. There are still too many businesses that aren't social, so today we're really pleased to announce our Small Business Boost program for Europe. We're going to provide 50,000 businesses around Europe with 100 euros in advertising credits. And what's interesting about that is 100 euros for a marketing budget doesn't sound like very much, except for most local businesses, that's enough to get at least one impression to every single one of your target customers. And those people can then go on to share it. So with investments of this size, we find that small businesses really can grow. We're working with partnerships with agencies across Europe to roll this out. In Spain, CEPIME, the Employers Association for Resources, is going to do resource things. They're going to help us give out those credits, and they're doing roadshows. In the UK, Next Gen Skills, they're a cross-industry coalition for better ICT education. They're working to set up workshops to ensure that people have the right skills to use this. In Germany, here in Germany, Bitkom, the Federal Association, just completed a survey of Facebook's impact on SMEs. And they say nearly 70% of the companies they surveyed, I think it was about 68, said that awareness has grown because of using Facebook. And 38% said that revenue directly increased. In France, we're working with the French Ministry of Labor, and they're announcing themselves an important initiative on Facebook, and that'll be announced in the coming days. So the internet and social media, it's not just posts and pictures and the fun things within friends, but this is really serious stuff. This is about growth, and this is about jobs, and this is about empowering people with voice. This is how businesses are going to modernize. This is how businesses will renovate, and this is how new businesses will start. In a world where increasingly these countries, like all of ours, have challenges, this is a really unique bright spot for our economies. Importantly, we all have to recognize that this growth is not going to fuel itself. In Europe, in the United States, throughout the world, we need to make sure we're investing. We're investing in technology, we're investing in basic education so that people can take advantage of these tools. We want to make sure that we have the right regulatory environment, a regulatory environment that promotes innovation and economic growth, that recognizes that it is the accessibility of companies to grow, the ability of companies to transition, that has to work in order for this revival to happen. The people in this room, many of us, many of you, have been working to push technology to show the world what it can do long before social. You are the people, this community, that are transforming the world around you. And we're a relatively young company, but at Facebook, we're really honored to be able to work with so many of you, to be able to create an open internet, a more connected world, and importantly, we hope, a lasting economic expansion. We have a saying at Facebook that the journey has just started. We're at the very beginning. I think with this community, we all know that we're just starting. We're only 1% of the way there. Thank you.
Come on up.
We have two
take a few questions. Sure.
2 questions, and then we finish. 2 questions. Yes.
Why do you think Turkey is the country where you have the highest Facebook usage?
I mean...
And before you respond, I want to respond to Ariana's comment about my usage of BlackBerry. A woman finds an old lamp, oil lamp, and as she tries to clean it, a genie comes out and says, you make a wish. And the woman says, I want my husband to love me, only me. I want to be the thing that he grabs first in the morning, last at night. I want him to be dedicated to me. So the genie turns her into a BlackBerry.
That's a good joke. I like that.
Is there a second question?
Yeah, I mean, so Turkey is an incredibly active user population for us, but I think you might be able to answer that better. Why is that? Like to communicate? Yeah, it's interesting for us. When I first...
There are more than 23 million Facebook users in Turkey. That's 1/3 of the country.
Yeah.
Either you guys are doing a hell of a job, or we love to communicate.
So what's interesting...
And gossip.
What's interesting about the question is, so when I joined Facebook about 4 years ago, the top penetrated markets in the world for Facebook, and this is before it was available in Turkish, were about 30% of the population. And we measure ourselves as a percentage of the internet population. So we were at like 30%. If you look today, and we thought that was really much the top. If you look today, there are many, many markets in the world where we're well over 50%. There are markets in the world where we're as high as 80 to 90% penetrated in the internet population. And so it turns out that this technology is something that can be increasingly broadly used, because we believe what you believe. You know, the Turkish people like to communicate, but as Ariana said, we're all very social beings, and everyone pretty much likes to communicate.
I think the last question here.
As a member of a pirate party, I'd like to ask you, you've shown us the impression on economy. What's your side on the view of democracy by social media and, of course, Facebook?
Sorry, so I want to make sure I understand. What's my point of view on democracy?
Yeah, what do you think? What is changes on democracy by social media and this change of power between the big and the small?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what I was talking about, that by giving individuals the power of voice, you give people the ability to change things in the world. You know, I used to give speeches, obviously, for Facebook, and I used to say this is a revolution, not in the let him eat cake in the streets of Paris kind of way. But it turned out there was a revolution. Right now, we're really careful. We don't get credit for the Arab Spring, or blame, in the sense that we didn't do anything. We didn't march in the streets or risk our lives. Other people did. But they used our technology and technology like Twitter and others to do that. And I think that's because, you know, social media, by giving people voice, solves a really big problem in democracy, particularly in countries that don't have as much, which is that, you know, people are able to understand what other people think. So if you are opposed to your government and other people are opposed to your government, you are able to understand that other people have that same view. And I think that's what you were seeing across the world.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Give an applause to Sheryl Sandberg.
Thank you.